Shall we move on to overseeing implementation?
Sure.
Great. Okay. So in what is often called the Petraeus doctrine on counterinsurgency, the quality of humanity, and you touched on this, frankly, early in our discussions, the quality of humanity seems to be an underpinning, particularly when it comes to winning hearts and minds, and not only that, but kind of aligning people. Before I ask about humanity specifically as a component of leadership, would you agree that counterinsurgency, particularly on the civilian side, is about having respect for the differences and the needs and the goals of the other side?
Sure, certainly. And again, as I alluded earlier, the human terrain is often the decisive terrain. That doesn't mean that the Hindu Kush mountains are trivial in Afghanistan, or that the deserts of Iraq or the cities of Iraq are, again, not important. That context, that terrain, that physical terrain, man-made terrain is very, very important. But at the end of the day, a counterinsurgency is a fight for the people. You're fighting with the insurgents to try to get the support, the loyalty, the backing of the civilian population. And that is crucial. And, you know, you sort of have to like people, I think, in this business. I tend to think that leaders have to sort of like people to begin with. You can't sort of fake it. I mean, if you really don't care about those, then it's, again, at a certain point in time, your soldiers, your civilians, your members of a firm will see through that. And so, again, I think there has to be a sense of effort to understand, in the case of, say, Iraq or Afghanistan or other regions outside the United States, to understand the culture, the traditions, the ethnic, tribal, religious, political, and other entities, and to have respect for traditions that may be different from ours. And again, I think that one has to demonstrate this, and we work very, very hard to try to inculcate that understanding, that respect, and all the rest of that. And remember, as I said, it's not enough just to secure that. You have to serve the population. By the way, now keep in mind, this isn't just U.S. It's also increasingly over the course of a campaign, your host nation partners. Needless to say, the idea is not at the end of the day for us to win the hearts and minds, although that may be necessary in a short term, but eventually we want the host nation forces and governments to win the hearts and minds of their own people. What you're trying to do is to get the Iraqi people, as example, to support the new Iraq rather than to oppose it.
Yeah, how could they be aligned otherwise?
Exactly, but unfortunately, in the very beginning, early on, after the invasion of Iraq, we actually took some policy decisions that created hundreds of thousands of opponents of what it was that we were trying to do. If you fire the military without telling them what their future is, and if you fire the Ba'ath Party, as much as the folks at the top needed to be killed or captured and then others need to be fired, but when you get down into the tens of thousands of a certain level, these are the bureaucrats, and you've just thrown them on the ash heap of history, because in a country like Iraq, there is no job outside of the government, at least for those in most of these different efforts. All universities there are state universities. Virtually every entity in Iraq could be traced eventually. Even the hotels were actually owned by the Ministry of Tourism and Trade. I mean, it took us a while to learn this. But so if you fire everyone down to a certain level, you have not got a reconciliation process. Again, I got it that there are certain, and we were frankly proud to kill the two sons of Saddam Hussein, Uday and Qusay, when they shot back at our soldiers when we tried to detain them. But at a certain level, you need folks to support you. And we used to ask a question about every one of our operations. This is another big idea operationally. Will this operation take more bad guys off the street than it creates by its conduct. And if the answer to that was no, then you should go sit under a tree until the thought passes, as we used to say. The same is true of a policy decision. And again, firing the military without telling them what their future was, and firing the Ba'ath Party members without a reconciliation process for those who could reasonably aspire to that, created enormous numbers of Iraqis whose future lay in opposing the new Iraq rather than supporting it.
You just increased your friction coefficient,
exactly.
right?
And again, some of this wasn't resolved until the surge, when we did pursue reconciliation, when we realized again that you can't kill or capture your way out of an industrial strength insurgency. You have to reconcile with the rank and file, by the way, while also pursuing the irreconcilables, the leaders of al-Qaeda in Iraq, the leaders of the major insurgent groups on the Sunni side, the leaders of the Shia militia, especially those supported by Iran. Those were irreconcilables, and they had to be either captured or killed or run off.
Understood. Okay. With this as the underpinning, and also trying to be respectful of time, I'd like to talk about some of the components that make up this humanity. And I know that you've touched on a couple, so we can do light touch on these. But your thoughts as to how each of the things that I'm about to mention kind of relates to your definition, your style of leadership. Integrity, trust. To me, it seems like that's the platform for effective leadership. The economy, democracy, it's the platform that everything rests upon.
Well, it's it's a very, very important component. Okay. Again, your troops have to have trust in you. You have to have trust. It's a two-way. It's a very two-way street. Yeah. You have trust in those who are in Washington. They have trust in you. Again, it's both up and down. Loyalty works up and loyalty works down, and they have to trust that you're going to keep their interests at heart. Particularly if you are engaged in leadership of combat operations, they have to believe that you have got their interests, their lives, very much, and that you're fighting for the assets for them, and that you are conscious. I would meet with company command. We would go twice a week on my battle rhythm. We would, right after the morning update that we had every morning, it started at 7:30 and at about 8:30. We would then get in an armored vehicle or a helicopter or a plane even sometimes if we were going all the way north or south, and go and visit a unit. And ultimately, after a quick briefing on a hood of a Humvee ideally, or a vehicle, so that you're not getting PowerPointed, you want to go out and see it for yourself, we would actually go on a patrol. And then at the end of that, I would always gather the captains who were commanding companies, because they were sufficiently experienced to have reasonably well-formed ideas, but still at a level where every casualty has a face, not just a name or a number. And they felt very deeply their obligation to their troopers, as I did. But I wanted to hear from them if there are issues that had not been resolved satisfactorily to them. By the way, I'd give them all my email, which you could get anyway. If you were on the military secure internet, you can get all the addresses. And I used to get a great deal of email from different levels. And I would tell them, if you are ever truly frustrated that your chain of command is not dealing with an issue that's very important to you, by definition, it's important to me, and let me know.
Yeah,
and
I recall you saying that specifically as it related to a civilian issue.
There were a number of issues, actually. It was across the board. And again, periodically, I would say once every week or so, or two, I would get an email from a captain with whom we'd visited, to whom I'd given my email address, and would say, hey, sir, I don't want to bother you, but this is a pretty big deal. We haven't gotten it resolved. I think you probably ought to be aware of it. And we would then try as best we could to treat it as an anonymous input and try to get it resolved. But again, that's what a leader has to do. And in addition to obviously providing energy, providing example, showing a willingness to share risk, share hardship, in some cases to lead, except when going through the chow line, as we used to say. We had a saying that it's hard to lead from the rear of the formation, which is another reason why physical fitness is not a trivial pursuit for those who are, again, under body armor and Kevlar helmet. And so all of these different activities, and to a degree creating, obviously you've got to show a personality, to try to, I guess, demonstrate, I don't know what you want to call it, charisma or inspiration or whatever it may be. But again, providing energy, example, and inspiration, these are three really important jobs of a leader in that task that is encompassed by overseeing the implementation of the big ideas.
Yeah. Well, you've touched on a good number of the ones that I wanted to talk about, but you were particularly forthright when it came to going first, and specifically as it results in the risks that one takes about being first to do anything, right? To show compassion, to do something that's dangerous, to meet a person halfway when you don't know the response of the person on the other side of the discussion.